Bonjour à tous. Je suis ravie de...
Hello everyone. I'm happy to welcome you here today. My name is Flavie Després. I created a media called Care News. We talk about commitment every day. We have a round table, which is not round, and we will try to survive those very painful chairs we're sitting on. It's quite a challenge, but hopefully everything will be fine. And we want to talk about funding, impact, and the more negative aspect of it, which is impact washing. We will talk about this for an hour and a half, promoting the value chain. If you see us fall from the chair, don't be surprised. Honestly, it's not easy. But anyway, we're joyful today. So, to get started, the room is small enough for us to have some rich interactions, hopefully. We're all lined up, so if you have questions, feel free to wave at me, because we cannot see much from here. So do not hesitate to raise your hand if you want to interact with us. I think all of us six agree. We want to have an honest discussion here. We want you to learn things, or at least answer some of your questions. So we really want it to be interactive. First, let's introduce ourselves. I've already introduced myself, so let's go in order. Riwan, you are an economist at the Institut Rousseau. But what is the Rousseau Institute? Hello, Riwan Rich. I am an economist at the Rousseau Institute, quite a young think tank, 2 years old. We think about a democratic social reconstruction of France under the presidency of Gaël Giraud. As for myself, I'm a trained economist. I worked at the Institute on different topics around environmental planning, creation of climate defense, finance, and if I can promote our institute for a minute, we published a report in April, 2% for 2 degrees. So we quantified the cost of the transition in France. That was a premiere. We're very proud of this. I recommend you read it. I'm also an administrator at the Climate Finance Pact, and I also have a job. I'm an economist, but I won't talk about this today. Very briefly, why am I here? My work on impact. I published a note on being on the markets, being unable to contribute to sustainable transformations in the real life economy. I was part of a publication called The Great Conversation of Terra Nova, and I also took part in analysis around marketing and impact. That's it for me. Very comprehensive. Thank you. Maud Cernan, you are the manager of the Emmaüs label, which everyone should know. Yes, Maud, I'm the director of the Emmaüs label. It's a very large store that is on the internet. There's about 2 million products, second-hand products. Just like in a thrift shop at Emmaüs, there are books, high-tech computers, smartphones, refurbished projects, so many things you might need to get back to school. We have many student offers as well at the moment. We should support students in the current period, and we don't do this just to sell products online and make a lot of money. We do this to train people who haven't been employed in a long time. We train them to digital logistics jobs, and we do this in a cooperative manner. So all profits are reinvested in the job. Why am I here? Because impact is my fuel every day. What helps me wake up in the morning and love my job. Thank you, Maud. Pervenche Beres, you have a mic. Could you introduce yourself? Hello, everyone. Pervenche Beres. I have been a EMP for 20 years. I was part of a committee when this concept emerged around impact analysis, which might be the foundation of this philosophy that we're debating today, impact washing. I look forward to this debate. I'm very interested in the topic, but right now I'm the chairwoman of a think tank, Association Europe Finance Regulation. 3 topics. Debate papers, we publish debate papers, and we try and avoid that the Paris investment scene does not just complain, but rather identify solutions to the emerging issues. We also organize forums where stakeholders, regulators, operators, and academics can have reflections on different topics. We have an expertise center that organizes monthly events to discuss different topics, and we also have a publication, the Financial Economic Review, which is a flagship of the organization that articulates the issue of finance and sustainable development, and today's topic is a constant concern for us. Thank you very much. Imad Tabet, you are director of the individual customers. Could you tell us about impact and impact washing? Yes, I'm a individual customer service manager at the Crédit Coopératif. Yes, I've been working at the Crédit Coopératif for 20 years now, working on topics such as solidarity finance and now impact funding. Crédit Coopératif is a French bank which is very active in funding social and solidarity economy stakeholders, and with this we have created financial products that aim at raising funds for those stakeholders of solidarity and social economy. So we fund their projects, and that's why we're very interested in those topics. I'm also a member of the FAIR organization, which used to be called Finansol, an organization created by the stakeholders of Solidarity Finance in order to create a certification, a label, in order to set up a system to certify those solidarity financial products. We have now become the FAIR organization. We have moved from solidarity funding to impact funding, so that's a challenge for us too. Thank you very much, Laurence. I will let you introduce yourself. Laurence Laplane. We cannot see the room, so we apologize. We have lights in our eyes. My name is Laurence Laplane. I'm in charge of impact investment at Amundi. Amundi is the leader in asset management in Europe, number 8 at global level, and we thought that we needed to have a clearer role. We have a small business line that's 2,000 billions asset management, and we manage 500 million euros investment in solidarity economy. We are also members of different organizations such as FAIR. Thank you very much. We'll spend a little less than an hour and a half together. We'll talk about the mainstreaming of the concept of impact and therefore its negative equivalent, that is impact washing. We have a very diverse panel. We'll talk about funding and financing. But let's take a detour on education, information, and communication. Maybe it's because I'm a journalist that we're talking about this, because I created 3 podcasts around impact, but I think it's important because knowledge is power. We will conclude around a discussion on regulation and what should be created to hold up this commitment. Laurence, you can keep the mic, and we are going to talk about the mainstreaming of the concept of impact. Imad will comment on that, but I'd like you to help us understand what we mean by the entire value chain and what we mean by impact and impact funding. Yes. First of all, let's give a reminder of what the criteria are when it comes to defining impact. An intention to contribute or to add something in order to bring something to the common goods, to the general interest, to the common house, something that will profit to a large amount of people. Another criteria, how to measure it. And we might end up talking about this measurement aspect. Fanny, you asked me to give some examples. I can give quite a simple example. The French system, which is quite original and helped push the emergence of solidarity and social economy companies. These are sub-companies with a mission, really. We know what a mission company is. They're certified ESUS, solidarity and socially useful company or organization. And this is actually quite an old system as well. With de Gaulle, we created the employee saving funds, an investment that is allocated to organizations. And what really changed is when this ESUS certification was created, which is to invest in companies of social and solidarity economy, which helped develop that system. This still raises debates. There's an economy part, a philanthropy part. It's hard to define, but in France we have quite an original system with the funding. That's what we call the employee saving funds, and the companies where you can invest. And we are basically just a medium, thanks to the trust of institutional stakeholders, individual savers, in order to invest based on that mandate. Erwan will talk about it. Merwan will talk about it. Just to give you an example, at Amundi, we manage 70 billion euros employee savings, including 10% for the business line that we just created 4 years ago. And I must say that we explain our investments every year to our customers, individual savers. That's one of the examples. There's more, but I think France has a very original system that should be exported. Thank you very much. Talking about impact, I did some research. I couldn't find a specific date. Maybe, Matt, you have one, when this term exploded, really became very popular. We have French Impact. I created a podcast called Impact Mania. So I'm guilty. I'm part of this leap into impact. Could you tell us about the increasing popularity of this topic? Yes. Originally it comes from the UK. Some work was done, including a very well-known study on reintegration of former inmates, including social criteria on financial products of efficiency of this reintegration process, with an improvement of products yield based on the results. There was this study that was done and that showcased the efficiency of this type of system. There was a lot of controversy as well, especially in France, saying that creating indicators of social impact measurement vs the system that we had before, which was based on subsidies. There were controversies around knowing whether this was the right method or not. We won't open that debate today. But this movement of impact funding came from the English-speaking world. This is now consensus. But we really had an internal debate in France because we had worked a lot on solidarity finance with sharing products that help share interest with foundations, organizations, products of solidarity investment in solidarity and social economy. So there was a transition which was assumed from solidarity funding to social impact funding, because we considered that solidarity finance was a substrat of this economy and that it was interesting to start this philosophy that was more European, not just French. Which was unique in France. So yes, in the end, it created that trend and transformed certain stakeholders who used to focus on solidarity funding around the concept of impact funding. So we created a label, some measuring tools for solidarity finance, and we must be able to do the same for impact finance so that we can all agree on common instruments and measurement tools. Well, we have an hour and a half to talk about this. Riwan, with the popularity of impact, one of the consequences is impact washing, which you know very well. Could you tell us about this, please? Yes. Impact washing. I took part in a study on ESG funds. Could you tell us what ESG? So that's social and environmental governance. These are not financial objectives. We've analyzed 700 ESG funds for individual savers, and 50% of them included impact allegations in their marketing document explaining that investing 1,000 euros in such fund help reduce emissions by X amount of CO2 or equivalent to taking off such number of cars off the streets. So quite ambitious allegations which were inaccurate, if not illegal. For one reason, those ESG funds are part of listed markets with a lot of liquidity. There is, of course, a prerequisite for these funds to be liquid because they couldn't include too high a risk. So those funds basically sell and buy assets on financial markets. So buying an asset, if I buy one asset, one share, I will not impact the cost of the capital of the underlying companies, which would have no impact on the capacity of the company to invest sustainably or not. So my purchase will not contribute to reducing the cost of capital for a green company and help them develop, and selling a brown company share won't help reduce the development or slow down the development of the company. So those impact allegations are completely inaccurate, if not illegal. I'm not a legal expert. I won't get into detail. It's much more complex than this. But there is a European directive which explains that claiming impact must be proven with scientific elements. However, in our analysis, we could not identify those scientific elements. So this raises questions around transparency, integrity, and protection of consumers, which is a concern, I think. Thank you very much, Merwan. If you have questions, comments, if you want to react, if we want to make things interactive, I think we're very much open to those discussions. Everyone understood impact and impact washing have money at the center, funding, of course. It's difficult to give an example of how to be funded when working in impact, but Maud, maybe you could tell us about your journey at Label Emmaüs and what made things easier for you when trying to find a connection between impact and investment. Yes, when we talk about Emmaüs, people don't necessarily think about fundraising or a need to find fundings. But yes, when you create a marketplace like Label Emmaüs, you're part of a very competitive world. Let me give you an example of a few recent fundraising for second-hand. Back Market raised 450 million euros, Vestiaire Collectif 350 million euros raised. So the largest fundraising in tech are part of the second-hand market. So that's quite a competition. Although, of course, we can all be very satisfied that those big fundraisers happened in second-hand. That's another topic. However, for more traditional stakeholders such as Emmaüs, not just Emmaüs, Secours Populaire, Croix-Rouge, etc., who live on donations from the French people in order to fund social action, it is a real threat. We might disappear because people would rather sell than give, thinking that they will have a very positive impact, which is not always the case. To sum up, we are fighting against those monsters. 450 million euros is huge. As for us, our turnover after 6 years, we are around 3 million turnover. We have raised around 2 million euros within 3 years in a very progressive manner because we are facing many obstacles when it comes to raising funds. You might think Back Market has nothing to do with it, it's huge, etc. Well, let me give you some data. Back Market is 600 employees, and Label Emmaüs is 60 employees. So that's 10 times less. I can give you the number of customers. They have 6 million customers. We have 60,000. So they're raising more than 3,000 times more money than us when they're only creating 10 times more jobs. So raising funds is often not proportionate to the actual economy, and it's the same for impact. And we needed to create a cooperative, which is a true struggle. We have a cooperative, which means that we pay taxes. We cannot access philanthropy. We cannot have tax exemptions. But we cannot raise funds through shares because we don't have shares. We have social shares. Cooperatives is a big topic when it comes to ESS. But in any case, what I would like to showcase here is that we are a SIC type of cooperative. It's the French legal status, SICE, which is a very virtuous model. It's hard to top that when it comes to impact, because earlier, Laurence, you talked about intent when it comes to impact. A SIC, an SIC, is not an intent. It's the actual social status, which is the general interest. Our social status is to first serve those who suffer the most. That is Emmaüs. And a company. We are a commercial company. But when your social status is to serve first those who suffer the most, that's a lot of impact.
But this is still the type of company that is struggling the most to raise funds at the moment, because it's social shares and there is no valorization of capital. There is no shareholders and that are getting money. And we go even further in sharing in among us rather than two shareholders, but we've managed to raise some funds. We've raised some funds, solidarity funds in Co, with working with Amundi, France Active as well, which is a crowd equity platform, ita.co, SFIN, which is the investment fund of the Crédit Coopératif, and Mirova, and many others. But it's a way of financing that is extremely costly. It's participative titles. It's not our capital. We say that we're not getting into debt, but if you look at it a very, very old-fashioned way of looking at finance, it's still kind of debt. It's costing us 5 to 7% per year. Those rates are extremely high, and we can't access a usual loan in France, which was quite low up till now, and below 2%, because they'll consider that we've got too much debt. So we can't have normal rates at 1.52%, like everybody have. At the moment, we'll have to go towards quite costly funds. So it's a real problem, really. And that's for the cooperatives, but also for all the associations, Loi 1901, which is like an NGO in the French law. So in terms of impact, we're talking about impact washing. There is how much fund you can raise, but there is also the citizen and consumer. Is there a threat on the speech? Because we're talking about second-hand, but we could talk about other topics that have impact. My objective, I prefer Back Market to Amazon. There's no doubt about that, without any doubt. But when someone is buying a reconditioned product, he needs to know that maybe that product's coming from very far away. Maybe it was reconditioned in Eastern Europe. For us, everything is made in France. They need to know also that everything that is reconditioned under Label Emmaüs is someone local and all the money he's spending will be reinvested in something positive. Back market, raise money from Goldman Sachs, so you think what you want from that, but for me it makes a huge difference. And how can we do so that the consumer can access that information? Because he'll go onto the back market thinking this is great because I'm not buying new stuff. Yes, it's better. Ecologically speaking, it is. That's true. But are we really reinventing a new society by doing that? That's the question. I can see you wanted to react. I wanted to go back onto the terminology, impact. Because I said when I presented myself earlier on, at European level, it's becoming very well known and everybody talks about that but it's a way of power between the Commission and the Parliament, which means that every time that a new law is going between the two, Commission and Parliament, we are looking at impact. And it's a passive approach. We're trying to check the impact of this law, whether it be a directive or a recommendation. And even though it might be hard to know exactly what impact, literally what will be the impact and how people are going to look at this law and implement it, it's hard to know. Now, that's how we started with impact. And now it's reintegrated in investment strategy. And that's where this roundtable is coming from. And if we'd done this roundtable 5 years ago, we would have been speaking only about greenwashing and not impact washing. So we need to look at how we moved from impact washing and those ESG terms and products, and how we move to a new way of looking at things, as though there was not enough of this environmental, social, and governance criteria. Because when we look at Amundi, Crédit Coopératif, your competitors or partners are all have a strategy where they've got a great ESG criteria. I speak as myself, not as Aquafear. They have higher and higher funds invested in those ESG products. And when you look at what COVID did, there was more and more exclusion, more and more carbon consumption, and even more poverty. And we've seen the summer we've just had. So is it really efficient as ESG products? And does it really have real impact? Because they were not created to be classy, They were invented because there was something that needed to be done. And so the fundamental question is, what do we want to look at? And what means do we give ourselves to look into that topic and to do something? And that's the aim of that roundtable this morning. And impact investment, this move from ESG, those criteria, and impact investment. The idea is that ESG criteria is too based on the business logic and doesn't look into social debate and different actors and stakeholders across the civil society. But I'm afraid that we will be having the same questions, even if we've changed the words. We need to be careful about that. And when we look at a company like Label Emmaüs, you can see that impact investment is a real be a problem because I've got a good example in legislative terms. We were looking into circular economy. What does it mean? Is help black markets and others. But at the same time, that means you're reducing raw material that is available for more virtuous models like Emmaüs. And this raw material is and helping people that needs to reintroduce them into society. So all these questions were it's a really complicated question. And when we're talking about cooperatives and how complicated it is to work under that kind of company, a cooperative is not at the head of the model. It's not a model. So trying to look into it's something quite complicated. Thank you very much, Pervenche. Laurence, I think you want to react to all this, and I would like also you to give us your point of view on those financiers. We talked about that together before. Yes, first I would like to go back onto what Pervenche said between ESG and impact. I've got an explanation that maybe is a bit basic, but still, for me, ESG is very mainstream, integrated. You can't do a financial analysis of a business without looking at its behavior and its environmental impact, social impact within the company, but also sharing of governance internally. In Amundi, we've decided that 100% of the funds that we realized that there was about 16,000 companies in this ESG framework. The idea is to create something. If we're creating employment, we are having a certain impact, yes, but it's showing what we want to bring to the common good, I would say. So we talked about social and solidarity economy. That's one way of impacting the society, but that's not the only one. Circular economy is another one, for instance. And the last point I wanted to mention was this topic of the kind of company. 80% of the company where we invest are either limited company or another form, SAS, which is another form of limited company under the French law. And then there's this question of liquidity of capital, but we might not go into detail about that. But I think a company can be virtuous despite the kind of company it is, on paper. This question of having the clear substantive financial investment, it doesn't matter on that. And there's also the question of how we share the governance. And we invest money, but we don't invest into governance. We don't have impact on the governance. They have their own governance. And all those questions is something that we need to look into. And some different status are adapted to the share, the size, and the impact of the company. We've mentioned the link between finance and impact. And there's also, when we look into that, we need to measure it. I think there's no better impact measure than that. Ours, or the ones we've put in place, but how do we measure that? And that's the question. Here I think, for me, but not just for me, I think it's a crucial point regarding financing of impact, is how do you measure it? we've said it during when we mentioned the definition in the criteria of impact finance is the intention, the addition, and the measure. If you don't measure, then you can't prove impact. The question here is. There are different methods, different way of measuring this impact, and different ones were developed. Some are more fairer, other less, and some impact financing is not. The actual impact is not clearly there. That's what we've been told before. So that's a real question. And it's a topic that it's not that simple to look into because you can build tools, very elaborated tools to measure this impact, to put aside all the side effects and really look at the additionality of the investment. We've got academics that have looked into that. But the question is, there is a movement where when we are looking at an impact model of impact measurement, it will cost more and more money. And there is a point where the impact investor, its intention is to actually have impact and not spend money on measuring that impact. If it costs you more to measure the impact you have than the action you're making in itself, then that's an issue, So nowadays, that's a complex question. If we go too fast and we measure just like really quickly, done by the management of that company who is investing, like quickly on the side and not really looking at everything and reappropriating themselves some impacts that are not really linked to their actual investment, then yes, we could be accused of impact washing and it would be fair. But if we are looking at a model which is more academic, very complex and works extremely well, in an academic article, then there's really this question of measuring it properly and financing this measurement, and how can we do that at a higher level, bigger level. I don't have an answer to that question, but I think there is a consensus we need to find because it's not there quite yet, and everybody has their own method. Thank you, Imad. But there's the cost of impact measurement, but there's also time. I'm an entrepreneur, and as Maud mentioned, we shouldn't be ashamed of our size, but because it's a sector that is not doesn't have the same financial power, economical power, our impact measures are just not very glamorous. I know very well that area. I go and see social entrepreneurs and impact entrepreneurs, and to get numbers, it's extremely complicated because they feel that if they give their numbers, the marketing size is going to be it will have a bad impact on this marketing side. Is it something that you can feel, and this question of measurement, is it something dangerous? Is it a limit? Is it needed? Yes, it's not something simple for money question, time questions, and number of people you've got in your teams to get all that data. It's not something simple. But we were lucky since the beginning because we were financed who brought the money and also offered to measure that impact at the same time as they were financing our company. So that was very good because we had a specialized company, Ipso, that was helping us to measure that impact. And it's really complex. You can't just meet for an hour and say, oh, we are looking to this and that. No, with Ipso, we had different workshops with different stakeholders, with Emmaus companions that are on the ground, that are putting all the products online on a daily basis, what the competence that they're going to develop. So it's also a qualitative question, not just quantitative. And we also ask the clients, the customers, their perception, how, are we a common e-commerce website or not? And it took us months to create 50 different indicators just for the social impact, for the environmental impact. We've got more tools, actually. I think it would be good if there were more research done on the social impacts, because on environmental impact, there's at least, we went to the Bilan Carbone Association, NGO, and they already had things in place, and we could work from that. But on the social impact, we are really starting from zero. So now we've got our indicators. We just run it every year, and it helps us also in the way we manage our activity, and also in raising funds, obviously, and in the communication in our company. Once it's put in place, obviously, it's almost magical because we can use it for many different things, and also to create a cohesion of the team because we've got a common goal, because it's not because we work in the impact area that everybody measures or have, really can feel how much impact they have. So it's good to be able to share that with the team. Maybe it could be spread into different financing lines. I don't know, maybe we should have to have the evaluation when we start to work on impact. And maybe I think the state should help a bit, I believe so. But not only in the implementation of that, it's a full-time position. I have a full-time position in my team, 60 employees, just in measurement of impact. In what you're financing, I guess you are helping the companies you're financing in measuring that impact. And do they also have quite a lot invested in that measure? I think we could know a lot also from Pervenche on the European level. But on my side, we are alongside companies. So we are going back to the topic we mentioned before. Those companies need to generate a real impact, and that will grow with time. And they also need to be financial viable, because this is what will allow the company to stay on. So we have some different indicators to measure that impact. It's fairly deep. We've got different sectors that are covered, and then we have a reporting impact, an impact reporting. That is fairly simple to use. It's a number of beneficiaries very often, and it's the question of housing, work, health, training, and environment and circular economy. Those are our main topics. It's not necessarily on the social side, but also environmental one. We are trying to see how much we are in line with the European taxonomy, but I'll let Pervenche speak about that because I think she knows that better than me. But we are looking into all that, and obviously we have a grid to measure all that. And we work alongside the companies that we invest in to be able to allow them to give us feedback in a clear and simple manner. Thank you very much. Pervenche, do you want to react to this? Oh la la. We still have half an hour, so I know it's quite complicated. But we need to already mention regulation topic, because you're doing the transitions perfect, because it is a sort of regulation. This question is when we're talking about washing, is really how we dress in the wrong color something. We pretend to sell green or social, So it's really going back to auto-regulation. If you want to sell your product, it's better to say that it's a green product. I'm saying things in quite blunt manner, but it allows us to look more deeply into that. If someone wants to sell something, he needs to say it's green, and you shouldn't look too far and really check whether it's green or not, But that's the point of greenwashing and washing in general. And so comes the idea of control and regulation, obviously. And behind this, I'm going back to what's on my mind all the time. But it's not just saying we are doing it, we are measuring it. It's really saying it actually has an impact. I hope there's not too many lobbies in the room. Please raise your hands. But in the car industry, we need to go from one place to another. Mobility is important, especially if you don't live in Paris. It's a real topic, I know that. But is the answer doing electric cars? And then the problem is solved. Is it normal that cars are bigger and bigger? Is it normal that we've got more and more SUVs within Paris, It's not a small topic. Nobody's measuring this. So behind that, it takes us back to another legislation topic at European level, and we need to go into that, who creates those laws and so on. But within the European legislation, this is this disclosure question. The disclosure directive on transparency of information on the company, and there's a huge debate on Article 8, which says that a business that is following ESG criteria, and then Article 9 says that a company has a strategy, can develop a strategy to be more sustainable, which would be more an impact investment. I don't know whether you agree with me on this or not, but at least it's raising debates for sure. So you can see that around that debate, there's a question of how do you measure, who measures, how do you control this? It's a major debate. And there was a text that was written up. We call it the CRD. It's very European wording, but it's on creating reporting, annual reports within companies on non-financial questions. And one of the topics that is debated is who controls that. Do we ask external authorities to do that, to come in and control whether the measures that are put in place are valid or not? And at European level, because we need to find a compromise, we decided that no. So we are going back to companies auto-regulating themselves. But they're not easy topics, because how do you create a norm, a regulation that is here for everyone, but without being able to compare? I had to look into that. We wanted to create a document to inform on complex financial products that could be accessible to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So when you go to your banker and you say, where should I invest my money? You should have been able to compare an investment fund and life insurance, for instance. And I had so much lobbying behind me, and they were saying, the logic is not the same. You can't compare that. And so we don't have the product that allows us to compare things. So how do you define your strategy when you you want to save money and you think, I want to save money in a way where I'll have an impact. I don't know, I've got 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 that I want to invest. And you go to the banker and they will be the one deciding what they will do with that money. But it's important, I think, to give you what they will do with your money. You know, whether you're deciding to put it in a life insurance or something else, whether you will have impact or not. And I think this is really complex. And behind that, there is also this question of efficiency, and that's really complicated. I think that the debate, I think there are three main stakeholders to have a good balance. People that are worried, and I think that's the majority of people in this room, that the economy is going the right way. I'm not saying the other ones are not doing, but I'm saying that it's not their main question, their main vector. Then there are financial people that need to find money to allow companies, businesses to invest. And then within the companies, there are people that are dealing with risks and profits. And all those three questions, I think, is at the heart of the problematic we'll be looking into.
Yes, we can start. Time is running. We've been talking for an hour already. Are there any questions or comments? Louis? Hello, Louis Bazir. I'm very much committed to organizations and solidarity economy. I would like to talk about Maude's testimony. I worked in finance for 45 years in a large bank, and what's really striking me here when we talk about solidarity funding, first, raising funds is very difficult, especially equity funds. And there's an issue, well, the French administration only thinks that the general interest can be supported by NGOs. And when your company, well, ESUS has changed that. Yes and no. Because when you make a donation to an ESUS company, it's not exempt, tax exempt. And the market is really small. When you talk about impact bonds, good. But there's no market behind it. When we talk about solidarity funds, I'm sorry I'm being a bit blunt, but those funds are full of liquidity because they cannot find supports that can be both reassuring to the buyer. If somebody's giving us funds, we don't want to lose them, but we want to keep impact in mind as well. And actually, you talked about it. It's somehow an illusion. And I think we should use our energy to focus on standards. And it cannot be a unique standard. When you work in microfinance, it's different from another activity. You have Emmaüs, imagine the other stakeholders, but I really think that we should really seriously start working on standards which could create trust, and that is not a hazard to the associations. I will conclude on that. Thank you, Louis. We will hear some comments or questions later. Oh. Sorry, he won. This, it's maybe a little break from the chairs. Could you please introduce yourself? It's like 40 degrees out here and we're blinded by the lights, so. Jessica Souriau, part of Removal Carbon, one of the partners of the events. I remember taking part in the working group on measuring impact from France Invest Impact, I remember that there was a project to measure impact and a referential, an official one. This project was supported by the ministry. Where is that? Who was part of the Olivia Grégoire working group? With the movement Impact France, we talked about the impact score, which is being developed by Impact France, which could be the foundation to create a referential together. That's it. People change. So you have to do it all over again, start from scratch. Thank you. I don't want to disappoint you, but I'm in less of a rush than you when it comes to regulations. We do have a lot. Pervenche can attest of that. We have Articles 6, 8, and 9. We have the environmental taxonomy, which will become social taxonomy soon. So we have a lot to think about. But of course, you're right. It's too small, it's too confidential. We must progress. But I'm usually an optimistic. The fund has tripled within 3 years. As I said, we have 1 million solidarity savers. I think it's not enough, but these are the true innovators, those who trust us. And I think impact has included a fourth stakeholders when it comes to aligning interests. Of course, the company, the employees, investors, and we've added the beneficiaries or the beneficiary. And that's what impact brings. And of course, there's history. We're not part of this standard battle with the Americans who call everything impact. But this fourth stakeholder that's been included in the value chain is something that is quite recent. We're progressing, we're hesitating, and I think it's very encouraging to see that we have so many people, so many young people around such a round table. So I'm quite optimistic, and I think that we will push for the inclusion of this fourth stakeholders when aligning interests. We thought about customers. We, of course, thought about shareholders, investors, employees, but we also must think about the beneficiaries. I'm going to show some authority now. It's my nature. Ask Basile how much of a tyrant I can be. Let's hear one comment, and then we'll talk about regulation again with Riwan, who has quite a strong position on it, and then we'll listen to the questions because I don't want to cover topics that we might cover later, so I'm sorry. I promised that we would finish on time. However, there's a hallway where we can have discussions. One question, if it's about regulation, not right now? There's many requests, so. If we don't open a new debate, the speaker is not using a microphone. When you invest in a company, you invest in future beneficiaries, and we talk about measurement. We're measuring impact. So you measure before, after, long after. So how do you do this as investors? It's not really measuring when the project is not funded yet. It's more of an assessment or an estimate. How do you differentiate that? Which reverts back to the question earlier, inaccurate promises when it comes to impact. Yeah, good question. Let's take all the questions, and then we'll have grouped answers. Over to you. Maybe a comment. Marianne Longley, Collective of the Citizen Organizations. We are a collective who strongly criticizes the concept of social impact investment in France. I think we must defend our model, our solidarity model. I think that this impact concept comes from the English-speaking countries, which includes finance to the social activities, which creates challenges for us. So I'd like to know about the European taxonomy. We might have a strong role to play when it comes to defending the French model of solidarity finance and not enter this world. I'm much shorter than Riwan, so I'm not as fast. Madeleine Fauché, Énergie pour le Monde. I just wanted to hear your opinion on the concept of impact washing. We are a foundation. We raise funds for projects. We're having great difficulties because we know that some companies want to have impact and give social donations, but we are struggling. And I think that this goes back to what you talked about, electrical SUVs. You can have a positive impact label and continue to have investment that make no sense. So the issue for us is that as part of a same company, there's this type of schizophrenia. One branch is interested in having a positive impact, maybe giving up on certain investments, but this has to work together with another branch, which is business as usual. So for foundations like us, it's very difficult to find partners because some really want to have an impact and fund us, but we're also partnering with names that continue to develop actions we don't agree with. So I'd like to hear your opinion how to regulate. Maybe that's the solution, regulation, but how can we make sure that the stakeholders we work with are completely aligned or innocent? I think we'll have to wait for a few years for this topic, but we talked about this, and I'll tell you a story later, if you don't mind. Another question. Thank you, Deborah Garagé. I worked at HEC Paris with the students. For Maud and Imad mainly, what is the main obstacle refraining consumers from using Emmaüs instead of back market or choosing BNP instead of Crédit Solidaire, for instance? Do you think that's a trend or philosophy? Imad? I wanted to answer the three questions, but I'll try and be brief. Starting with the last question, maybe? What pushes consumers to choose big corporations who do a lot of communication, who are much more present? The answer is in the question, really. It's not easy for stakeholders who are less famous, who communicate less, who might be focusing on doing rather than communicating, to emerge and to be in the front line. But we are progressing. But this is indeed part of the issues that we have to manage. Coming back to your question, how to measure an impact that has not happened yet. We really asked ourselves that question. We launched pre-impact analysis, and upstream, we define the indicators with our customers, find the ones that are relevant for their activity, and based on the contract, we plan that Once those indicators have been reached, 2 years later, based on the methodology we defined, then the interest rate goes down. That's one of the solutions. There are others. But yes, indeed, there is this question around defining criteria upstream, criteria that will be measured later. Coming back to the question around defending the French model vis-à-vis the quote-unquote English-speaking world model, yes, that was a complex question. But in my structure, in my institution, a choice was made, which is to decide that this model, this French model, made us lose visibility. There was also the issue of accessing European funds. So we made that choice, saying, okay, since the European debate is on this, we're going to get in it and try and defend within impact finance the French model and not leave it to the English-speaking world. But it is a complex question, and it's a political debate that is complicated. Thank you, Imad. Let's now get back to this topic around regulation. We have 15 minutes left. What I suggest is that we give the floor to Riwan so you can explain this topic, your research, your perspective, and then we'll start the debate again, trying to answer the questions and comments that we heard from the room. I just wanted to say that we fund companies and not projects, so it's quite different. I'll answer to the other questions later. Thank you. Just referring to what you said, madam, I think I agree with you. There is a risk of focusing too much on complex measures when it comes to impact, which are very micro level. So we might tend to forget the overall impacts of finance in general and mainstream finance mainly, which are quite negative. I won't give you the data, but we all remember them. So my position is that those narratives around impact are developing a lot because it's a way to hide nefarious financial practices. And if we want to resolve the issue of impact washing, we might want to focus on preventing mainstream stakeholders from talking about impact. So how to change the structure of finance to have positive impacts into the real economy. And that includes taking into account long-term perspectives, because financial stakeholders are often on short-term. That's called the horizon strategy, the horizon tragedy. It's quite negative a concept. It relates to the Greek tragedy. And finance is not it. At the moment, the short-term vision of finance is a deliberate choice, which relates to regulations or absence of regulations. So I don't agree with Laurent on this one. So very briefly, we have students in the room. So I'll give you a very short lesson. Why are the financial markets focusing so much on short-term? Let's start with the assumption that there's two types of investors. Speculation investors who want to make benefits on the shares they buy, and more long-term investors, fundamental investors buying shares in order to keep them in their portfolio. And These breakdown of investors depends on the liquidity of the market. So you need to start from the price of the share. So the more liquid the market is, the more short-term it is. The more short-term it is, the more self-referenced is the market, which is not in relation with the real economy. And this liquidity level of the market is based on the liberalization that has been implemented in the 70s, because making the markets more liberal reduces transaction costs, makes transactions easier, which encourages this short-term vision of the markets. I have a graph here which shows the opposite of what you said, Laurence. What's shown here is that the financial markets have been more and more liberalized since the 70s or 80s, but it's quite an impressive trend. And based on that graph, you can see that impact finance is more in a setback than in progress trend. So I think it would be interesting to explore the macro vision rather than focusing on micro debates. And I just wanted to highlight that I'm seeing a chain of liquidity rather than a chain of impact. The more liberalized the markets are, the more investors ask for noise of 10 or 15%. So good luck to transform production assets that are greener and that cost more than the current ones. That's impossible. So this is a real issue. How to make sure that finance as a whole contributes to positive transformations in the real economy. And impact is good. I'm not saying any different. But if we define it by the actions of the financial markets, it remains marginal. That's it. That was for my little detour on this topic. Maud, I think we're going to leave completely depressed. Yes, I usually think the same. Things are moving, but it's terribly slow still when it comes to finance. Just to answer your question, a very quick poll now. Since you're not a representative sample, you're probably more committed than the average. But let's do it anyway. Before this conference, who knew that Emmaüs sold products online? So you're clearly not representative. Who knew that Back Market existed? So you're basically advertising Back Market here. What's fundamental for me is communication. How not to know about this platform when all metros and buses have advertisements about it. This is huge funds. Our communication budget at Label Emmaüs is 40,000 euros. So there's not even enough for a little poster in the metro. They're probably very good. Their customer service is amazing, I'm sure. But try our website. You'll see we're not that bad. So that's really the issue here for me. This is also why I talk a lot about accessing the media, at least public media, for impact, for everything that is good for the planet or society. How come we still don't have, at least in the public media, some budgets, some part of communication? We hear about it for Radio France a little bit, but this is very small still. And most of the time when I get pro bono advertisement, it's really when nobody wants to buy those communication slots. So communication and finance is really key. I also am a firm believer in intermediarization, which is to have direct access to investors, consumers, students, citizens who want to commit. And I hope that finance will continue to evolve to help investors invest more on impactful projects, because right now we're at a ratio of 90 to 10. So we still have 90% that does not actually lead to sustainable development in those saving systems. So I think that there are some real obstacles to access traditional finance, but it's also a way to have direct access to citizens saying, you want to do something with your savings, get into our capital, one person, one vote, and your way is the same as anybody else in the value chain at Emmaüs. And there is still some tax exemption. There are still some systems, although it's not capitalization. And the state can act as well. They can make those investments much more attractive. We're almost at the end of this session, but I fully agree when it comes to information. Why do people like watching 24 hours news channels when all you hear about is some anecdotes? In this world, everybody wants a click on something glamorous, but there's few of us independent media. We don't depend on advertisers because this is the foundation of freedom. And since we can complain, I will. We don't get much support. Being a journalist today, people always tell us that we're sold to power. When we say something, they feel that we're bought by powers. But when it comes to information, it's very important, and we need some advertisement regulation and even media regulation. As long as we have some infomercial and that we invest in a system that is not good for our brains, and mine actually. But I think there's really an issue around information, around measurement. We could have a 1.5-hour conference on label washing. These are not impact measures. I'm not against it. We do have a top ranking of impact structure, but there's really an issue, and we're fighting here with our two arms, but I think there's really something to do when it comes to regulation. Sorry, I really wanted to give you the floor. Yeah, I just wanted to answer the questions. We don't fund projects, but companies. And in the legal documents, we include, and I talked about sharing governance, sharing creation of value, but we include clauses to our contracts around impact. So that's for the question asked about the French model. I'm a huge fan of the French model. In European forums, we should promote it. However, it's not the only medium for impact, but this French model is incredible. Some countries are interested in it. We advised the Austrian government, who was looking into it. And now when it comes to communication, at Amundi, we decided not to communicate on the social and solidarity economy. I don't have any communication budget, actually. But I think there's an important topic which we haven't mentioned, that is giving scale to studies. There's a study that I really like, which is 20 years old. It's an English study that showed that when you invest €1 in energy renovation, that was published by Études Carmonde or the Abbé Pierre Foundation, I'm not sure. When you invest €1 in energy renovation, that's 42 cents less investment in health. There's not been another study on this. I'm reaching out to HEC. I'd like to see more of those studies to know in the long run of what impact generates. That's really something we should work on. Thank you, Laurence. It's 44 past. I'll give you the mic and then we'll have to leave the room. But maybe we can continue our discussions in the hallway. Thank you. I just would like to answer to what Laurence Laplan just said. I really wanted to talk to you about a 20-year-old study done by British researchers called The Spirit Level: Why Equality Matters. And it shows, based on data, that equalitarian societies are more efficient societies. What does that mean? That in our discussions, the point is not to know which label is good or which company is behaving. What we want to know is if we have the tools to change the game for our companies. And there's a topic that I've been focusing on for more than 20 years now. When we started to be concerned about social governance, impact investments, financial experts were concerned about something else. That was the great financial crisis. And those two worlds developed next to each other. And the challenge of finance being at the heart of a company strategy, because what matters in the end is profit, not impact. And that's a very tough debate. And in companies, those working on social governance are often people who prevent risk takers from acting. And when setting up a company strategy, which their main criteria is profit, then we can align on this. And that's why we can talk about all the stakeholders we mentioned here, but the responsibility of public power is huge, which opens a new debate, which we haven't covered, which is that if you want to have an impact on the strategy of a company, while the price of CO2 and carbon tax is, and this is more environmental, but I think that they are interconnected, and that's a major issue, which requires the public powers to intervene. We know that they would have to define a carbon tax, and it cannot be done in a blunt way, because if there's no redistribution system, it's a dead end. I'm sorry for concluding on a topic that is broadening the debate rather than resolving it, but I think we cannot skip that topic. Thank you. Pervenche, one sentence. Thank you. Maybe just a message for the HEC students present. Think about what I said when you have lessons on the existence of markets, when they talk about reduction of taxes and transaction costs favors the efficiency of the markets. No. This creates some very short-term markets. This creates Danone, the subprime crisis, and markets that are unable to fund the environmental transition. So just a little tribute for you guys. Wow, the HEC students are very well taken care of today. We need to leave the room. I'm sure this could have lasted another half hour and a half. Have a great day.